Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How are we all today? Are we awake? Yes? Well, you will be after this morning's sessions because they're very exciting, I can promise you that. My name's Gemma Greenwood. I'll be moderating the sessions this morning. And thank you very much for attending the second Global ATM Halal Tourism Summit. Last year's inaugural summit was such a success, we decided to do it again. And we've added an extra session too. That's basically in recognition of the growing importance and influence of this sector. In 2016, global Muslim consumer spending on travel was valued at $169 billion. That's around 12% of total global spending on travel. That's according to Thomson Reuters. To put this into perspective, Muslim travellers spend as much as all US travellers on outbound travel. It's a pretty big market. And by 2022, Muslim spending on travel is expected to hit at least $283 billion. In this region, Middle East, it's the largest market in terms of Muslim travel expenditure, valued at around $61 billion in 2016. Interestingly, though, the term halal travel is not as widely known as you might think. Excuse me. Let's get water. So enthusiastic there, I caught my breath. In fact, a recent poll conducted by one of our panellists who's here today, Omar Ahmed of Sociable Earth, revealed that 64% of respondents were not actually sure what the term halal travel meant. This really shows that the industry has more work to do to capture the imaginations and the wallets of the Muslim travel market, which is why we're here today. Today we have 4 back-to-back sessions addressing a wide range of topics and featuring a lineup of leading travel experts from the halal and mainstream travel sectors. Our first session will provide you with an overview of the halal tourism sector, its value and growing importance, the trends that now define it, and its outlook for the future. So joining us here today, there were going to be 3. We have 2 at the moment. The third one might join us. Let's see. We have 2 leading travel industry authorities. To my immediate left here, we have Faiz Fadlillah, who's the founder and CEO of Salam Standard and TripFairs, 2 online businesses that are dedicated to the fast-growing halal travel sector. And sitting next to him, we have Mario Hardy, the CEO of the Pacific Asia Travel Association, otherwise known as PATA. For those of you that aren't familiar with PATA, I'm sure you are, it's a not-for-profit membership association that facilitates and promotes responsible development of travel and tourism in the Asia-Pacific region. Obviously, Asia-Pacific, one of the biggest halal travel markets in the world. So he's going to talk about some of the trends that he's witnessing too. So, should we get started? I think to start off, Faiz has conducted, you can sit there if you like, Faiz, you don't have to stand up. He's going to give us an outline of some of the work he's been doing, some of the studies he's been doing and figures that talk about the trends that he's seeing in the halal sector at the moment. So over to Faiz.
All right, thank you, Gemma. So I'll go through a few slides with some important contribution, looking at the contribution of Muslim travel towards the world's GDP as well as the job created. One of the interesting thing about Muslim travel or halal travel or any travel in that sense is the fact that I think a lot of the drive is actually comes from the millennials. So this is a typical scene of millennials getting together. So a lot of them are actually playing phones. I'll go through a few stats much later to show what are the trends, not just among Muslim travelers in general, but also among the millennials, Muslim millennials. So this is a typical slide. So these are some of the key trends. So if you look at in general, the global tourism, since 2009, tourism is the only sector, apart from finance, which has always been growing. So if you look at some of the key trends, this is a report by the WTTC. It comes to show that a lot of the regions that are showing rapid growth comes from Southeast Asia, South Asia, North Asia, Middle East, as well as the sub-Saharan Africa. And these are the region which has predominantly a lot of Muslim people living in this area. And if you take into account, so this is the stats which shows the global millennial. It coincides very perfectly with the slide before, which shows that a lot of this region is actually fueled by younger people, as well as swelling middle class, which is fueling the consumption of tourism. So these are the two areas or criteria which fuels consumption within this region. So it's this region houses young population as well as huge amount of middle class. Skip through a few slides. So Muslim travelers in general spends about 122 billion in 2016, and by 2020 is expected to increase to 157 billion. What is interesting is that it's a key sector for economic development and job creation. So it generates, in 2017, it generates about 148 billion in terms of GDP contribution, contributing about 4.7 million jobs worldwide. So this is very interesting because within the next 10 years, it is expected to still continue to be one of the fastest growing segment of travel, as well as still outperform the global economy. So I'll skip that. So what we did was we took a look at 19 individual economies, which represent 80% of the global Muslim travel market. And what we found out is that actually that this is the global inbound Muslim tourism expenditure, and what is interesting is that if you look at the first two segments, so the EU and the US represent about 53.3% of the global Muslim travel market. So a lot of the Muslim travelers tend to choose EU as well as the US as a location of destination. So this is very, very interesting because these are destinations which are predominantly non-Muslim. So that's something which I find very, very fascinating. But besides that, Asia, as well as the Middle East countries, attracts more than 46%. That is a third. And within the next 10 years, these are the areas which are expected to continue to grow. In terms of outbound Muslim tourism expenditure, when we took a look at it, Saudi Arabia outperformed way ahead compared to other countries. Saudi Arabia is leading at $23.3 billion, followed by the UAE, Iran, Indonesia, and Turkey. So this is very, very interesting because Saudi Arabia is an emerging destination. And if you want to attract, let's say, Saudi Arabia tourists, a lot of the requirement of what they're looking for is actually that fits within the Muslim context. So things such as halal food and etc. And Saudi Arabia, for example, within the next 3 years is expected to grow to $27.9 billion, representing about 70% of growth. So what are millennials and what are they looking for? So the global definition of millennials are those which are below, I think, born after 1980. So what are they looking for is actually, it's very, very interesting because these are the younger generation which are entering their prime spending years. So if you want to attract them, and I think it's a very, very good strategy because within the next 10 years, they will be the one which actually be spending a lot in terms of tourism as well as other things. And the amazing trend is that 34% prefer to buy an accommodation compared to, let's say, 20 years ago, where the people find that after you graduate, you want to have a stable life. Whereas compared to millennials, they want to have experiences rather than a major landmark in life. So 72% prefer to go on a holiday, which shows or which provides huge potential in terms of tourism. Millennials were the first digitally native generation, so they tend to post everything online. So 67% of Muslim millennials prefer or post things, videos, photos, moments on social media. So before I came here, I actually posted a few myself as well. So everything is about experience. So 69% thinks that it is important to experience authentic culture. 79% think that traveling brings them closer to their own culture as well. So when they travel, for example, so travel has become a very inclusive activity. So you want to travel, and everyone has their own preference. So that's where, let's say, Muslim travel comes into hand. So you want to create a traveling experience whereby wherever you go, you still feel that you belong there and you still feel at home. So you can go to Korea, for example, as a Muslim, for example, and still experience halal kimchi. So that's the whole idea of Muslim travel. And being a huge sector, I think it's, for a lot of the NTOs, it's a huge opportunity to attract this market. Social media engagement beats everything. So millennials, when they travel overseas, they like, so if you look at this is a very interesting trend. So if you look at your friends, for example, when they never post anything, but when they go overseas, they start to post 30 moments, 30 pictures. Every single minute when you scroll, it's just them, because they want engagement. They prefer engagement. So for a lot of the NTOs, if you want to attract, let's say, Muslim millennial, you have to actually have things which make them feel exclusive, things which is an authentic experience that they can experience, and etc. So 67% choose the destination based on what brings value to them. It's not what they want to see, it's places they want to go because they want their friends to see that they are going there. So it's not about Paris anymore. It's about being on top of Nepal, very high, like above the clouds, for example. So that's amazing experience. So millennials have little or no brand loyalty. So when they choose, let's say, a flight or a hotel, it's not about specific brand, but it's about convenience, it's about pricing, it's about what fits their demands. So if you want to go to a place, let's say that offers, between two places which offers halal food and doesn't, so they choose places which are convenient to them. And what is interesting is that millennials, they don't want to wait. So this is a very interesting, if anyone can answer this. So if you go to places like, let's say Dubai, for example, you have Careem, you have Uber. What is the average time that a millennial can wait before they actually switch app to a different, or take a taxi, for example? What is the average time? Anyone can guess?
Anyone have the answer? How many? 3 minutes.
Close. It's 4 minutes. So anything when you scroll and you see that the next available Uber is 5 minutes, you're going to switch app because it is too long. And if you compare that, let's say, to 20 years ago, people would wait for a taxi. They'll wait 20 minutes or 5 minutes. But nowadays, people don't want to wait anymore. So 2 minutes, for me, 2 minutes, oh, this is really long. I'm going to switch to Grab or any other app, or even take a taxi because I don't want to wait. So that's in general some stats.
Brilliant. That was fantastic. Thank you, Faiz. Appreciate that. Mario, so we've heard a lot of stats, a lot of trends from Faiz. How would you say that this is reflective of what you're noticing in the Asia-Pacific region?
I think Faiz covered most of it. By the way, his nickname at Pata is actually Selfie, Mr. Selfie.
Now we know.
When he described about millennials taking pictures and sharing moments, he's certainly a great example of that. But one other thing, I've asked my Muslim friends about when they travel, what are they looking for? And actually, the answer was quite interesting because all of them said the same thing. Ask my wife. Because apparently and I don't know if you agree, those of you in the room, but they've all told me actually that the planning is done by the ladies, by their wife. If they go on holiday, the woman actually will be doing all the planning for all the trips. The man just follows, which I thought was really interesting. It's probably the same in most cultures, to be honest. But going back to something a little more serious about travel, as you all know, the growth of travel in Asia is phenomenal. Every country is experiencing double-digit growth, and it's been going on for at least a decade, if not more. And our forecast for the next 10 years is the same. We're seeing double-digit growth in every country in Asia, both inbound and outbound. What I find interesting over the last couple of years is the increase of outbound travel also from Asia in countries such as Vietnam, which is now increasing at a phenomenal rate. I just saw some figures recently that I just couldn't believe it. I had to ask somebody to triple check that actually the numbers of Vietnamese going to Korea have now actually over 300% over the last 12 months.
Wow.
For a very simple reason. Korea actually removed visa restrictions on Vietnamese. So the numbers have been increasing enormously. We've seen similar trends in other countries. As you probably know, in Indonesia, the tourism minister, when he took over his position, one of his first tasks is actually remove visa restrictions on 163 countries. Suddenly, overnight, the number of tourism arrivals actually doubled. So we see phenomenal growth in every single country. Thailand is now 35 million visitors last year, going into 40 million pretty soon. And these numbers keep increasing. So it doesn't matter if it's actually specifically from a Muslim origins or from different areas. The numbers in general are just actually growing. For me, Muslim travel is one of many different niche markets, but it's a very big one. And until a few years ago, not many people actually paid attention to it. Faiz was probably one among some of the first ones who started to actually see that there's a great potential for growth. There's 250 million Muslims around the world. According to MasterCard, 126 million actually traveled in 2016, and that number is going to grow to 157 million by 2020. So there's lots of growth in that area.
And I know it's hard to put a figure on it, but can you kind of give some indication of how influential the halal travel market is within the Asia-Pacific region?
I think each countries are, those who are a little more advanced are actually focusing on it. Thailand certainly has a focus on halal travel. There is halal-friendly hotels that have opened up in Bangkok and other parts of Thailand also. There's a little more attention to it than other countries. Of course, Indonesia, Malaysia, it's a given. And other countries around the region, like Japan, for example, have started also to pay more attention to this market.
And do you think the term halal travel is widely known there? I would presume in Asia it probably is, because, as you rightly say, the destinations are targeting this. But as I said in my opening information, referring to Omar's survey, a lot of people don't know what it means. Do you think there's a real opportunity there for us to start marketing this as such, as halal more?
Yeah, I think there is, and there's more education to be done. Imtiaz Mukbil, who sits in the back here with his hat, conducted a workshop in our office a few months ago. And it was interesting to see the different opinions within the group of the definition of halal. Different people have different understanding of what it is. Some people had no idea what it was. Some of our young interns actually participated and didn't know much about it. Others actually were a little bit more knowledge. So I think there's still a lot of education to be done about what does it really mean? What are the expectations of Muslim travelers when they come to your destinations, when they come to your hotel or your attractions?
Fantastic. And just lastly, before I come back to Faiz, so he was talking very much about millennials and trends around millennials. How far does general travel trends within your region mirror the Muslim travel trends? I presume it's very much on par. What's happening mainstream travel relates to halal travel as well.
Yeah.
Cool. That was easy. I kind of answered the question there, didn't I? Faiz, you talked about Saudi Arabia. Now, obviously, that's a country that's undergoing rapid modernisation at the moment. So I would presume at the moment a lot of that expenditure and that value would actually be what we class as religious tourism rather than general travel with faith-based needs. What do you think will be the opportunity? As you know, there's a lot of changes in the country. They're building big leisure destinations as well, trying to get mainstream travellers to Saudi Arabia. What do you think the opportunities there, particularly perhaps from Asia-Pacific region? And Mario, perhaps you can shed some light on that too.
I think looking at Saudi Arabia, not just outbound, but as well as inbound.
Yes.
So Saudi Arabia is doing a lot of initiative.
Yeah.
When I spoke to the Saudi tourism, they want to have a lot more tourism that is just beyond religious travel.
Yes, exactly.
So a lot of the inbound travelers into Saudi Arabia right now are for religious purposes. Like you go to Mecca, you go to Medina, but they want a lot more travelers, for example, MICE travelers. They want a lot more travelers into their countries, which would contribute a lot to the economy as well.
Yes.
So I think, and they did build a city recently, which is to improve tourism, and they also have a few initiatives like the visa. I mean, like
New
you can
visa
switch
rules,
visa, and a lot of initiatives. But if you look at outbound, I think it's a huge opportunity for other countries. So they tend to spend a lot. So when we did a few studies, we see that the Saudi tourists tend to stay longer because they have, I assume they have longer holidays, but they tend to stay longer, they tend to spend a lot more as well.
Yeah.
So for a lot of the countries, it's a lot more value for a little, like for lesser amount of tourists. So I think
Sure.
it's a huge opportunity for a lot of the NTO to target Saudi as well as other Middle East countries, tourism basically.
Sure. And Mario, what do you think, particularly again for inbound and what Saudi Arabia can now do and build on that?
I mean, I was impressed yesterday. I walked around the exhibition, and the Saudi stands is probably over 2,000 square meters. It's huge, much bigger than in the past. But I spoke to other destinations that are here in the Middle East about the fact that actually Saudi is now opening and what their views were, and it's quite interesting. Some were concerned that actually they see it as it will be a great success, and they're concerned that it might steal away some of their tourism arrivals. Some others actually see it as a benefit because people will come over, spend some time in Saudi Arabia, and maybe come across and spend other times also in other destinations within the regions. But certainly has great potential for growth. It's rich in history, it's rich in culture. It's a country that for many was not accessible for a long time. Speaking to the Saudis yesterday, and I was in Argentina last week, and the Saudi prince was there, and he talked about visa restrictions being gradually removed also, making it easier for people to travel to Saudi Arabia. So I think we're going to see an enormous growth within Saudi Arabia in the next couple of years.
Just ask one more question. I'm going to open it up to the floor. So Faiz, you mentioned that the US and the EU are still the biggest recipients of halal travel, even though they're non-Muslim destinations. Now, what does that mean for Middle East, Asia, and I'll ask Maria the same thing? It's getting more competitive. People are noticing, and we'll talk about this in the next session, all destinations around the world, Muslim or non-Muslim, have realised this potential for halal travel to cater to that market. What are countries going to have to do in this fiercely competitive environment where everybody is going for this market, given EU, US have still got this pulling power, obviously because of the experience they offer? What do you think needs to be done?
I think a lot of the destination like Japan, Korea are doing significantly a lot. If you look at it, let's say Australia, for example, some of the places that you go in Australia, they do offer halal food, but they also offer the sahur. So if you fast during the month of Ramadan, you tend to have your breakfast a lot earlier. So some of the hotels in Australia are actually offering that. So you can switch your breakfast to have an earlier breakfast so that you can actually fast for the whole day. So that's very interesting for me because it's a predominantly non-Muslim country.
Yeah, simple tweaks.
Yeah, and they're doing a lot to target this market. So Japan is one of the destinations which does a lot. So if you go to, let's say, some of the airports, some of the airport have 2 or 3 prayer rooms, which is a lot for a country which has a very little amount of Muslim people there. Korea, for example, Japan published a book which shows or which map out a few of the restaurants which offers halal food. And some of the restaurants does modify their food to make it more Muslim friendly in the sense that they don't have alcohol in it, they don't have pork in it, and it's seafood based. So I think a lot of destinations are actually realizing the potential, and they're doing a lot to target this market.
What about, though, because you were saying about the whole selfie-worthy experience, obviously those faith-based needs are important, but from what you were saying from your research, they want to go and brag. So where do the two balance out between having the halal food and having that experience where they can post the selfie?
It's about the local experience. So let's say you go to Korea, you post a picture with bibimbap and all that. So it's a little bit more interesting compared to, let's say, you go to Korea and you post a picture of a kebab, which you can find in your own country. So I think that brings a lot more value to it as well. And adding to what Mario is saying, so we did a study and we found out, let's say, between male and female among Muslim people, so the male tend to prefer destination which has food.
Yeah.
So they tend to post pictures of food, hey, I had this amazing food, whereas the guys prefer experience. So that's one of the results of which I found very, very interesting because it's interesting to see the different preferences between different gender. Not being gender biased or anything, but I found it very, very interesting.
But it was just what came out of the study.
And what is interesting as well is that for a lot of people, especially those above 35, a lot of the decision of places to go or what to do is actually from the women. So my dad, for example, if you ask him, where do you want to go? Oh, ask your mom. So she will decide what hotel we're staying at, she will decide where we go, and she will decide how long we're going to stay. So he doesn't have a say at all. So whenever he wants to go to Australia for the past 20 years, they've never been to Australia, the outback Australia, because she doesn't like the outback.
Do you think that's going to carry down to this generation, though?
I would assume so. I mean, it's the women has a lot of
let's face it, we know best, you know.
influence in the decision making of where to go.
Brilliant. Quickly, Mario, what do you think about, you know, how important the experience is, and, you know, perhaps what Asia needs to do to keep pace with, you know, the other destinations? It's got the halal tourism offering more than the other countries have, but it's the experience and the selfie-worthy aspect that's becoming important too.
Yeah, I think marketing to the Muslim community is no different than probably any others. What you show may be a little bit different, but otherwise, as Faiz described, it's, you know, pictures of food. If people in Asia love food. And then, so that's one of the driver of travel in most instances, actually trying different foods in different places. But also it's about creating unique and local experiences. We all know this from millennial studies that we've done, and I know Faiz have done too, is that people want to experience something local and engage with the local communities also. And I don't think it's any different from someone who's Muslim or who's not. And I think that's the main difference.
Sure.
My wife and I, for example, when we go to Japan or Korea, we tend to go to halal-friendly restaurants because we're both vegetarians, and it's very difficult to find vegetarian foods in both countries, but easier in halal restaurants.
Interesting. Great. Do we have any questions from the floor? We can open this up now to, would you like to ask our panellists any questions about their research?
Imtiaz, of
okay,
course.
We have two here. We'll start at the back there, and then we'll move to you at the front, sir. If you could say your name, where you're from, that would be great, and who your question's for, if possible.
Sure. My name is Imtiaz Muqbil from Travel Impact Newswire in Bangkok. My question is to Faiz. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuhu. What is the source of all those statistics that you mentioned? There were some huge numbers there. What is the source of these? What is the methodology that you gather these figures from? I'm sorry to say, but a lot of them are suspect. They seem to be sort of, I've been seeing these surveys for years, and the numbers keep getting inflated all the time, but you never actually come to know what is the source of these figures. And in a part of the world where getting statistics is so much of a problem anyway, there's this wonderful ability to conjure up these figures which are mind-blowing. But, I mean, give me some science behind it.
I like that question. So my researcher has prepared for me a long answer to this question. Unfortunately, I didn't bring it today, but a lot of the sources are actually from WTTC, for example. The UN has a database of study. The exact answer or the exact thing, I can share it with you, but because I'm not a researcher myself, I don't have the exact wording and stuff. But a lot of the stats or numbers actually come from publicly available data from the UN, from the WTTC, for example. So then you do a few modelings to come up with the numbers.
I actually think yours were quite modest, actually, compared to, say, Thomson Reuters, for example. The figures I quoted at the beginning, yours are actually slightly less. So I think you're probably pretty much on par with those as well.
No, we hired recruitable people for the research.
Mario, you want to?
No, I just want to say the numbers I quoted before were from the MasterCard Crescent ratings. I don't know if you've seen the report, Imtiaz, but it's actually very interesting and very detailed. It was just released maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I would recommend for you to have a look at it.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. One more question at the front here. Oh, we've got two. We've got time. Yeah. 6 minutes to be precise. Hi, what's your name?
Hi. My name is Shakil from Tanzania,
Hi, Shakil.
East Africa. Thank you for all the presentations and the talk. It's very valuable. As you say that Saudi Arabia is the biggest market for outbound halal tourism into other countries, but how many are they, these people? I know they are big spenders, So if they are the major spenders, but in regards to the number of people, is it only a certain group of tourists who actually travel and spend billions of dollars?
Do you have that from your studies, Faiz?
That's a very interesting question because I think so. I spoke to a few NTOs, Palau, for example. So a lot of the NTOs they tend to focus their focus a lot more nowadays to people who spends rather than the number of tourists. So you want to have, let's say, lesser amount of tourists, which would give your country lesser like other impact, but they spend a lot more. So that's a lot of the focus of the NTOs nowadays. So they want to have people who spends a lot, but the lesser in amount. You don't want to have your country flooded with tourists and disturb the local balance. So you want to have
value.
The local value. So you don't want to have it flooded with tourists, but you want to have a little amount of tourists as possible, but they spend a lot. They contribute a lot to the GDP, which in then contributes or create a lot more jobs. So that's what you want. So for a lot of the NTOs, that's the focus nowadays.
I think there are, if you look at WTC website, there are definitely figures out there in terms of number of outbound travellers from Saudi Arabia. I think that's quite widely available, and you would presume that they would all be Muslim halal travellers. So you could probably find that from the World Travel and Tourism Council, UNWTO.
Can I just add one comment? I don't know the numbers of outbounds from Saudi, but one thing I would actually say is that Saudi Arabia has got one of the youngest population in the world. So I think if you think actually longer term, in terms of future travelers in the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to see a greater number of actually Saudis traveling overseas. So if you're planning ahead, probably now time to actually market to them for the future travels.
Definitely. Thank you. One more question, and then we're going to move on.
My name is Irfan, and I'm the CEO of irhal.com, which is a halal travel site catering to about 1.5 million Muslim travelers from the Middle East. My question or comment is about the numbers again. I was at a seminar yesterday where they were talking about the Chinese travelers.
I was at that.
And there are about 120 million of them who travel. But the question that I raised to the person who was saying that is that how many of them actually travel outside, if you take away Macau, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. So that's 70% of the 120 million people, they travel to just these three cities, which are predominantly China. So it's an extension of China. So the outbound travelers that we see coming out from China is actually just about 35 or 40 million. Whereas the Muslim travel market is, if you look at the number that Faiz has quoted, or the number that Dinar Standard or Fazal's Crescent Rating MasterCard number, they're all in the 120 million range. And these Muslims come in all colors, shapes, and sizes. And that's one unified market, which is maybe 4 times as big as the Chinese outbound traveler,
Yes.
Excluding those going
Yes.
to periphery cities.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very important market to deal with. So that's one thing. The other is a statement related to the question about the Saudis spending a lot of money. Amadeus did a study recently about the GCC traveler. And on an average, they spend about $9,920 every time they go overseas and on a 5-day trip. Now that's substantially more than just about anyone else. So there is a huge amount of spending power in the GCC. Again, quoting a Dinar Standard Thomson Reuters study, 3% of the Muslim population live in the GCC, but they spend about 37% of all global Muslim travelers. So there's a huge market within this region that is spending a lot of money, and there's, I feel, great potential. Talking about travel within the Asia-Pacific region, I was traveling to Seoul last year, and at Dubai airport, at the Korean Air counter, they were giving away books with lists of halal restaurants in Seoul. That's the amazing kind of thing that is needed by destinations to encourage more Muslim travelers.
Thanks.
Thanks.
You. Guys, do you have anything about China that you can...
Yeah, I can comment.
Yeah?
Sorry.
Just to add, so I'm part of the Malaysian Travel Association. So we have meetings with a few countries' counterparts. So what I found interesting, there was one time a delegation from Japan. So after we were all sitting down, they have the translator and everything. So a few of the people were starting to talk about sake and some nice wine from Japan. But what is interesting for me was that the mayor at that time, who was leading the delegation, so the first question that he asked was, how do we make our destination a lot more halal? So I thought that was interesting because there was a lot more question that you can ask, but he was focusing a lot on that. So that's just something which I would like to share. It shows the importance of
Yes, yeah,
this
exactly.
market.
Mario.
I would agree with your comment. I mean, I think that if you look at the spend between the Muslim travelers and the Chinese, it's probably significantly higher. The one thing I would comment, though, about China is out of this number, the number that never gets quoted before, is 180 million Chinese have the means to travel overseas. That means there's 180 million of them that are yet to travel. So the potential for growth out of China is double what it is today, or even more than that. And I think finally on your number about the 9,000 average spent, I would say that maybe that number is a little bit skewed by the fact that one of the Saudi prince spent $100 million for his summer holiday.
That could have. Also, yesterday, talking about the Chinese sessions that were here yesterday and the day before, I think it was quoted that last year, 50% of travellers from China travelled outside of the region for the first time. So you're right, it's starting to happen. Those travellers are starting to go outside of Asia and explore. So yeah, interesting stuff. I'm going to ask you one more question to round up. See if you can answer it in 1 or 2 sentences. I don't know if that's possible for Faiz. We'll see. If you could name one thing that would accelerate the growth of the halal travel industry over the next year, what would it be and why?
I think more access to information. So a lot of the destination, they do have, let's say, halal offering, but sometimes they don't market it as such. So I think a lot more information, which is like
actually telling people what
telling
you
people
do.
what you're actually doing. So
well, we'll come on to marketing in the next sessions. Perfect. Mario.
2 things. Number one is relax of visa restrictions. And the second is actually education. More information about what halal travel is.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. You've been
Thank you so
fantastic.
much.
Please give them a round of applause.